Hello. Right, we're now at the point where we can actually start looking at the scale shapes themselves. Obviously we've covered quite a lot of ground conceptually, but I'm hoping once we start tying all this stuff together into scale shapes, a lot of these concepts are going to fall into place, and you'll see them in context. So what I've done is I've prepared a list here which systematically is going to break them down. So we're going to start with the first position, and we looked at this in an earlier video, so this will be recapping it and just adding a few extra concepts to look at when we go through the scale shape. So first position. So the first thing to do is establish your basic bar chord form that underlies it. So it is on the 3rd fret, it's a G major. So we're going to be in the key of G major because that just nicely lays out these scale shapes without getting any weird positions in the neck. So, okay, so I'm going to quickly rattle through the scale shape. So it is starting from the low E string, 3, 5, 2, 3, 5, 2, 4, 5, 2, 4, 5, 3, 5, 2, 3. Now we can also add a couple of extra notes. We can add this note here, which is 5 on the top E string, and we can add this note, which is 2 on the low E string. Okay, so you've got your bar chord form. So you need to be able to see this. This is your home. So it's always a good idea to quickly play the bar chord before you play the scale shapes, because it gives your ear a home to latch onto, and it also gives your eyes a visual point of reference as well. So the first approach would be to play the scale, break it down into octaves, and name the intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, octave. And then you start again from the same note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, octave. So by breaking it down into octaves, suddenly it breaks the chunk of information down, and you can establish, you can rattle up and down this scale, which we will look at, but it is useful to break it down into its component parts, and then you know where your root notes are. They're here. And you can see the start and end point of the scale as you do it. And obviously naming the octaves will also give you another reference of what's going on. Okay, so we've done that. So also what's useful is to look at the other chord shapes that we looked at and see how they fit into the scale as well. So obviously you've got your F shape. And it's quite useful to actually practice from one octave, from this shape. Because quite often when you're soloing, you're probably going to be using the notes in the upper register. So your hand is more likely to be in this kind of a position. So to see this chord shape is very useful. And it acts as a kind of home whilst your hand is in this position. So that's a useful one to know. And then have a look at your major 7th chords. And try and relate and go, well, where do the notes of this chord fit into this scale shape? So you see, that's where you can see, okay, that's where my 7th is, that's my 3rd, that's my 5th. And also this form is useful as well. So it's like an F shape, but you add a note on the 2nd fret. So it's useful to spend some time just playing each of the chord shapes and then just playing the scale shape around it, and just see how they fit into the shape. And again, this gives your ears and your eyes some references to home notes and where the 7th note is, so you can find it more easily. Because basically chords and scales are not two things that are separated from each other. They're basically, every chord you should be able to relate, every scale shape you should be able to relate to an underlying chord. So in this case, we've got your bar chord, you've got your F-shaped chord, which is the same as the bar chord, but just taking a couple of notes out. You've got a power chord there, you've got a 7th note. So you should spend some time playing those chords, playing the scale shape around that, so you can just see how they lock in together. So once we've established that, then we can take a bit more of a mechanistic approach, and this is the one, if you're going to break out the metronome, this is a good one to do it with. So we're going to play it and add the extra notes, and we're just going to play it as a continuous thing without stopping or breaking it into octaves. So note, when I added the extra notes, I started from G, which is the root note. I climbed up the scale, then I descended the scale, then I added the extra note in, and then I ended on G. Now that's important to do that because it gives your ears a frame of reference to what's actually going on with the scale. So a good way to practice it would be to play your bar chord, so what I would do is I would play it through a couple of times like that. Play your bar chord, play the full scale, play the bar chord, and then if you want to set up your metronome and then just repeat it mechanically up and down, that's absolutely fine. So after I've done that, what I then want to do is I want to break this scale down into smaller fragments, because we've broken it down into octaves. But if you remember the first exercise that we looked at, we just literally, it was a mechanical finger exercise, and I'm there going, okay, well the next thing I want to do is start relating the finger exercise that we did in the first set of exercises to the scale shape. So I'm going to go on the first string, and I'm going to break my rule of start. This is purely to establish, the finger combinations. I'm going to deviate away from this rule of starting on the root note. I'm going to start on the second string, and I'm going to play 4 counts of triplets. So it's first finger, second finger, fourth finger. And there you go. So that's just like the first exercise. I'm going, well, that's my finger combination. Then I'm going to go down a string, go, oh, hey, it's the same finger combination. Then I'm going to move down to the D string, and then the finger combination changes. I'm on first, second, and first, third, and fourth. Okay, I've only got two notes there, and then here I'm on this finger combination of 1, 2. So just by breaking it down into these small fragments helps to learn the scale shape. And then you can start seeing that all these scale shapes they're just these finger combinations broken down and added together. Now the second finger exercise that we did was linking 2 strings and playing them as 2 string combinations. So what I'm doing is, just if you need to recap the first exercise, go back, but it's basically the first exercise, the second finger exercise repeated. So I'm doing first finger, second finger, fourth finger, and moving down to the string. and then I'm going to move down to the next pair of strings. Now on this pair of strings, unfortunately I've only got 2 notes there, but that's okay. I'm just going to play it as a 5-note combination. Okay, it's a bit of a weird 5-note combination. You can't get that fluid groove going that you can with the other strings. But the thing is, what we're doing is we're looking at the scale and we're just literally breaking it down into combinations. And what will happen is, as we keep going through these scale shapes, you're going to see that these combinations of fingers just keep repeating themselves, just in different orders. So I'll just do it again. So shift strings. So I would spend some time doing that and establishing the fragments. Now, by establishing fragments, it really helps with your improvisation, because the problem is, when I show this stuff to people and go improvise with it, their brain goes, oh my God, I've got this great big load of information. So what we can do, and this can help with your improvisation, is you can just start breaking it down into these smaller fragments as you're improvising. So this would be my 6th approach, is going, okay, I've done all my mechanical stuff, I've looked at it, I've related it to the chords, and now I want to try and express some poetry in my soul. So a good way of doing it is you could play a couple of hits on your bar chord, then choose a 2-string combination and then start improvising with it. So and obviously I could break it down into, so what I did there was I was playing with the lower 2 strings and just trying to just feel my way around it, and then I moved to the next set of 2 strings and did the same kind of thing. And it's also useful to do that with the F shape on the higher strings as well. And again, then you can start experimenting with 3-string combinations, but it's useful to find little fragments in the scale that you feel comfortable being in when you're improvising. So, and then suddenly you move from having this great big mass of information here to little fragments that you can improvise with. And I'm going to show you one of my favourite little fragments here. So this fragment is, if you know your pentatonics, I call this the pyramid shape. So I'm going to start, this will be on the 4th fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret, 3rd fret, 5th fret. And I call that the pyramid shape. And then you could end on that note there, which is the root note in an F shape. So again, I find that is a really useful fragment to improvise with when I use that down the pub jams all the time. You need something major, you've got to find some notes quickly. So that, I call that the pyramid shape, and again, that's worth playing with. And you can also get into you can find the 7th note very easily from that shape. You just got to shift back one. And if you want to add the extra note there, it's easy to find. So there you go. So to recap, you play your basic bar form, you play the scale up and down, just breaking it down into octaves, naming the intervals. Have a look at your other chord shapes, your F shapes, your 7th shapes, and try and relate the scale shapes to them. Add any extra notes in the position, and then start breaking it down into 1 string and 2 string fragments. And then when you start improvising, apply the same concept. Just break the scale down into little fragments of 2, maybe 3 strings, or even 1 string, and get comfortable, and then just start exploring that way. Otherwise, what tends to happen is people just run up and down the scales, and they kind of get lost. What's better to do is break it into small little fragments, then try and come up with little phrases in your improvisation as you're going through it. And what we're going to do is we'll go through all the next, there'll be 4 more scale shapes to go through, and we're going to apply this kind of thinking as we go through the next scale shapes. So see you in the next lesson, where we'll be looking at the Dorian shape.